webcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to today's webinar, Leadership for Sustainability, Strategies for Tackling Wicked Problems, hosted by the Maryland Department of Planning in association with the Smart Growth Network. My name is Michael Bayer. I'm the Manager of Infrastructure and Development at the Maryland Department of Planning and Project Manager for the Smart Growth Information Clearinghouse. The Smart Growth Information Clearinghouse is a project of the Smart Growth Network, supported by the U.S. EPA's Office of Community Revitalization and managed by the Maryland Department of Planning. In addition to hosting webinars, the Smart Growth Information Clearinghouse has a website at smartgrowth.org that provides current information on effective growth, development, and preservation practices. The website provides news and information about events, funding opportunities, awards, and resources to help local decision makers foster healthy, resilient, and economically vibrant communities. The Clearinghouse is the virtual home of the Smart Growth Network, a nationally recognized coalition of leadership organizations that have formally endorsed the principles of smart growth. This webinar is one in a series of webinars produced by the Maryland Department of Planning on smart growth and planning topics available for viewing at smartgrowth.org. We are recording this webinar and will be posting it on our website under the Webinar Archives tab. We encourage you to visit the website and to subscribe to our e-newsletter for smart growth and planning news and to learn about our upcoming webinars. You can also find out about planning initiatives, planning tools, and educational opportunities in Maryland by visiting the Maryland Department of Planning's website at planning.maryland.gov. The views expressed by the speakers in this webinar are those of the speakers and do not necessarily represent the Maryland Department of Planning or the state of Maryland. Viewers of this live event are eligible to receive 1.5 CM credits from the American Planning Association and 1.5 CNUA CEU self-reported credits from the Congress for the New Urbanism. To log your AICP credits, visit the American Planning Association's website at planning.org, log into your account, and search for the name of today's event, which is Leadership for Sustainability, Strategies for Tackling Wicked Problems. You can also search for event number 9212924. I would like to acknowledge our partner today, Island Press, and their partnerships manager, Jen Hawes. Founded in 1984, Island Press's mission is to provide the best ideas and information to those seeking to understand and protect the environment and to create solutions to its complex problems. So to get started today, our speakers are Bruce Hull and David Robertson. Bruce Hull is a senior fellow at the Center for Leadership and Global Sustainability at Virginia Tech, which provides graduate education and professional development opportunities for sustainability professionals working at the intersection of business, government, and civil society. He has authored and edited numerous publications, including 2 books, Infinite Nature for the University of Chicago Press and Restoring Nature for Island Press. Also, David Robertson is founding director of the Executive Master of Natural Resources Graduate Degree Program and senior fellow at the Center for Leadership and Global Sustainability at Virginia Tech. Dr. Robertson is also the founder and principal of EduScene, a travel education upskilling consulting firm. Bruce and David will be taking questions from the audience during each section of their presentation, so please submit questions by using the questions tool in the control panel located on the right side of your screen. This is a slight modification from how we usually do it, so you may want to submit your questions earlier as we go through this, and we'll share them throughout the program. We will also ask questions from the audience for the last 15 minutes of the program, so please submit them throughout the next 90 minutes. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bruce. Welcome, Bruce. And I guess actually we're going to start with a quick poll here, Bruce, which is asking folks where they live and or work, which is probably the same place at this point. You have 5 options. If you're having trouble responding to it, you may need to exit the full screen mode. And we'll leave this open for about 30 seconds or so to give folks a chance to respond. And then I will go ahead and read the answers, and then we'll turn it over to Bruce to get started. And it looks like folks are answering this, so thanks for participating today. We'll leave it open for a few more seconds. Quite a good distribution. both throughout the U.S. and internationally. Give it another second or two. So today we have 36% of the audience is in the U.S. Mid-Atlantic or Northeast, 21% in the South, 17% in the West and Midwest, and 9% of our audience responding is international. So with that, we'll go ahead and now you can start, Bruce. Thank you.
Okay, looks like the poll is still up there, John. It's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I look forward to the hour and a half I'm going to be with you. I'm hoping to inspire you a bit to discuss a few topics maybe that remind you of leadership strategies and tools that will help you be more influential in your work, revisit some familiar ideas, and think a little bit differently. But before I get started, John, I see that the poll is still up on my screen.
Trying to get that down.
Okay. So let me all right, looks like are we up and running now?
Yes, you're good to go. You're a little blurry though.
Okay. Well, hopefully I'll come into focus. So thank you again. I want to talk about this book that we're putting together with Island Press. It's a great opportunity to work with Island. Always respected their work. And as the intro said, David and I have been working with professionals that are seeking certification, seeking graduate program, and professional development for some time. And we've been able to record a lot of the opportunities and examples over the years. And this book is just an opportunity to share them. And it's really three things. It's a roadmap, it's a toolbox, and it's a storybook. The roadmap sort of helps people map out their careers, thinking about how to have influence and position themselves in the changing times that we're facing. The toolbox really is a set of tools that address these wicked problems that we face and how to have influence given how systems change is needed. And the storybook just describes lots of these tools. And I'm going to talk about a few of these tools and give a few illustrations as we go through. David is going to be, my co-author David Robertson will be listening to or observing the questions that you ask. And I'm going to stop every 5 or 10 minutes or so and take some of the questions. So if you have questions about content that's going on, please punch them into the question box. I want to start though with a little bit of context. I want to set the stage, if you will, to talk about some of the assumptions I'm making that I think are affecting us today. These challenges that we're facing. One is that the leadership needs to deal with the extreme polarization and paralysis that we're faced with today. I mean, it's a huge challenge. We've perhaps never been this divided politically, and so we need ways to think across these divisions and this confounding challenges to collaboration. I'm also suggesting that we live at a time where our expertise, many of us are experts, professionals, technical people. The institutions that we rely on and use to promote expertise, they're as questioned as they've ever been. And so expertise is losing credibility. So we need to be able to work in this new context. I'm also suggesting that we live at a time of dramatic change. That just about every observable trend, whether it's an environmental trend, climate, energy, water, urbanization, or it's a social trend, they're changing dramatically. We're recreating the biosphere and we're moving into the Anthropocene, and so it's dramatic challenges are in front of us. So I'm also assuming that many of us on this call are not big we're not at the top of the food chain, at the top of the hierarchy with policy levers in politics and national government. And I'm also going to argue that the type of leadership that I'm talking about here is not at this national level or even the state level, but rather at the systems level, the systems change level, where we're working at a cityscape on smart growth. We're working between cities and industry and supply chains and vulnerabilities. We're working on regional energy supplies and food chains and food systems, and we're incrementally changing things. We're working at a systems level, and so we need tools that work at this systems level. And so that's the set of strategies that I'm going to focus on. I'm also assuming that you have a lot of technologies that are available. You've got dozens and dozens of ways to implement policy and regulation and building codes that solve smart growth issues. You've got PDRs and TDRs. You've got PACE financing issues and renewable energy plans and electrification. You've got all kinds of tools available. The challenge is not having the technology to solve the problems that we're facing, but rather the challenge is implementing and scaling those technologies. That's a leadership problem. So that's the stage I'm setting. Is we've got the technologies, we've got serious challenges, right? It's not big policy levers. We're working at scales where we all need to make a difference. We all need to have leadership. And so that then begs the question is, well, Bruce, what do you mean by leadership? What is leadership, and how does it have influence at this scale, right? And so that's what I want to begin is talking about leadership at this systems scale, systems change scale. And here is the traditional model of leadership, and I'll get my fuzzy face out of the way here because I don't want to be associated there. This is a model of leadership that, it's the most common understanding of leadership as somebody who has positional authority, somebody who is an elected office or a corner office, or because of their charisma, perhaps because of their wealth, communication skills, whatever it is, puts them in a position of power to get followers to follow. And that model of leadership is necessary and it works for some problems, but it does not work for the wicked sorts of problems that we're talking about here. We need a new model of leadership. We need a model of leadership that works on where we can all pull together, where we can all make a difference, where we can all contribute to the change that's necessary. We all need to be able to lead from where we are, because the sorts of problems we're talking about, no one has authority over everybody. We're all working in different organizations, probably different countries, definitely different states. And so we need to figure out a way to coordinate our activities and collaborate across all these differences. So we need a shared model of leadership. And that's what I want to introduce you here for the next couple minutes. It's really just it's a pretty simple model, and hopefully it's familiar to you, but let me just give you the background. It's direction, alignment, and commitment. This is the model of shared leadership. Pretty much anytime, any place, anywhere that leadership has occurred, where a group has got things done, where leadership is defined as a group, a collective, let's say it's a team. It could be an organization, it could be an agency, it could be a city or a nation or whatever it is, that collective, if they've gotten something done, there is direction, alignment, and commitment, right? They've decided what direction they want to go, what we want to achieve, what the goals are, right? We've aligned our activities so that we can get those goals done. We've figured out what needs doing, who's going to do it, and we're getting it done. And we've been committed to getting it done. We're sacrificing, we're working for each other, we've got buy-in. So pretty much anytime, anywhere, any place leadership has occurred, where a group has gotten stuff done, those three qualities are there. So that begs the question, so how do we generate direction, alignment, commitment? That's the task, right? And that's the toolbox I want to talk about today. Some of these tools help you think about how that direction, alignment, commitment can be promoted. So it works on these different types of systems, these systems of systems, where we're talking about partnerships and cities to supply chain relationships and co-ops, and certainly smart growth sorts of issues, okay? That's the definition of leadership. And so again, let me get my fuzzy head out of the way here, but the shared system of leadership that we're going to talk about here in a few minutes is empowering, and it's a diagnostic. It's empowering in the sense that everybody can lead from where they are. In the program where David and I teach, and the work we do with working professionals, is that a lot of the folks are not yet in the C-suite, right? They haven't yet got the corner office, and they're working to have influence, right? And they find this definition incredibly powerful because they find that there's an opportunity for them to have influence over the larger system. Even people that are already in the C-suite, already in the corner office, they see this as an opportunity to have impact, because they then say, okay, it's not about power and authority, it's about getting directional alignment commitment. What can I do to get directional alignment commitment? Right. So that this is as a diagnostic. You can, if you're in a situation where you're wondering, we don't seem to be getting much done. Do we have direction? You can ask, what questions can I ask to help get direction? What strategies can I use to help identify the goals and get people on the same page? Or maybe we don't have alignment, and what can I do to help influence alignment? What strategies can I use to, are some activities not being done because they're too mundane, they don't have enough status, or maybe they're too risky, they're not worth the risk isn't worth the reward. And so, what can we do to make that happen? Or maybe there's not commitment because people are dragging their feet, or maybe even sabotaging the effort. So what can we do to get directional alignment commitment? That's the challenge. And that's pretty much what this book is about. There are all kinds of tools and techniques and strategies and ways to think about getting directional alignment commitment. So that's the main point I want you to get out of what is leadership. It's this model of shared leadership, right? It's getting directional alignment commitment. It is not the model of leadership from above, because in order to affect the systems that we want to affect, we need a whole bunch of different strategies. We need a whole bunch of different ways to have impact. So we need things that connect people who are working across space and time, different organizations. We need things that help get people to collaborate across these big polarizing differences of different agencies, different languages, different ways of thinking. And certainly we need ways to adapt to the dynamic change and all the uncertainty that exists. So we need these three sets of tools. And the book has all those tools in them and many, many more. I'm just going to talk about a few of them today. In the time that we have together, and give you a taste of it. But I hope you'll see lots of familiar themes here in thinking about leadership, thinking about influence, thinking about having some impact. The main one I want to talk about is identity management. I'm going to spend 10 minutes or so talking to you about this, and then David's going to break in and ask some questions. So identity management is the big frame for thinking about leadership, for getting directional alignment commitment. And the first thing I want to point out to you is many of us hold this myth. Many of us who are professionals and experts have this myth that there's an information deficit, and all we have to do is somehow inject into the minds of people information, and that will change their behavior. And well, that's just not the case, unfortunately, and I'm going to explain why. So what I'm suggesting you do is if you're in a situation, if you're working in a group and people are saying, hey, what we need to do is give people information. They just don't understand what the problem is. If they understood like we did, then they would behave differently. And no, that's not. Hit the pause button and say we need other strategies to get directional alignment commitment, right? Or if people are saying, hey, we just need to educate the next generation, we just need to get them outdoors or teach them about recycling, hit the pause button and say, no, let's think of some other strategies to get directional alignment commitment. So to make this case to you, I'm going to have to give you a little bit of Psych 101, right? In the case, and the point I want to make, the argument I want to make is that all of us are susceptible to these exact same issues. We all have to practice good hygiene in decision making when it comes to identity management, because we're all susceptible to some of the problems I'm going to share. It's just like these optical illusions, right? The horizontal lines in the left, they look like they're not the same length as the ones in the top, but we know that they are, right? Or the vertical lines on the right, they look like they're bent, but they're actually parallel. We're all, just like we're all susceptible to those optical illusions, we're also all susceptible to identity protective reasoning. And here's where I want to pause and talk about this sense of a challenge, the way we're wired to think. that voice in your head, the reasoning that you use to make decisions. It's tempting to think of that as a lawyer. I mean, as a scientist, somebody who's weighing the facts carefully, who's doing a cost-benefit analysis, but that's not how we think. We're not wired to think that way, right? We're instead wired to think about the world as if we are a lawyer trying to prove our innocence, trying to convince others of our innocence, even if we're guilty, right? That's the job of the lawyer. We're trying to make ourselves look good to others, to have status, to be a part of the group, to differentiate us as a member of the group and others as different from us. That's how we're wired to think. That's the voice in your head. That's what it's doing when you're reasoning. You're not immune to that. Nobody is. There's this tendency for us to differentiate between us and them. That's incredibly powerful, and it's based on evolution. It's based on us being trying to keep others who can threaten our children, threaten our food, threaten our security from us, right? We have to differentiate us from them. And so we're very good at doing that because of our identity protective reasoning. We're very good at saying, we're good, we're safe, we need to protect our kind, and the others are bad. They're lazy, they're corrupt, they're different than us, and we don't want them. So that's the way we're wired to think, and that means it translates sort of into today's politics. We're not differentiating people based upon whether they're going to come into our area and steal our food or harm our children. Instead, we're differentiating people based on political party, based upon football team, based upon whether you're a professional or not, whether you live in an urban area or a rural area. Those are the indicators that we're using to differentiate among each other. And when we trigger those differences, we're triggering identity protective reasoning. Okay, so that's the psychology 101 lesson here. Let me talk about some of the implications of that. The first implication is that you're gullible, right? You are susceptible to all kinds of information bias coming your way. You select information that can supports your identity, supports your group's position, supports the way you think, and you ignore or don't pay much attention, or it doesn't stick if the information doesn't agree with you. You're incredibly gullible, right? We all are. We know this from the terms of confirmation bias as a sort of the technical term for this, that we confirm our bias, and so we need to work against that. We need to figure out a way to be cautious in how we're taking in information. The filter bubble sort of puts this on steroids. Filter bubbles are also a familiar concept. I'm sure you've heard about them. And what they do is we surround ourselves with people, and those people are the ones that we like because they give us information we like, right? Our social network that confirms our biases. We select news feeds and listservs that give us information we want. And so we confirm our biases that way. We are on Facebook groups or whatever that send us information based upon what we've liked in the past, or the search engines we use give us information that we've searched in the past. So these filter bubbles make confirmation bias happen all the time. So you need to work against that. The most pernicious, the most difficult challenge we have to overcome are the echo chambers, right? Here's where you really need to work, because echo chambers are going to force people to only agree with their group. And this makes compromise incredibly difficult. So the echo chamber is not just going to filter information, but it's going to denigrate, it's going to cast out, it's going to chastise the people who are questioning the dogma of the group. And when this group is threatening you, if you question the facts and figures, then it's very hard for you to figure out how to collaborate with people outside that echo chamber. Let me give you an example. Let's say you happen to be in a group that is a climate skeptic, climate denier, and so you're sort of cautious about anything to do with climate change. And so when somebody finally gets your ear and you do start to think about it, and you maybe bring that question back to your group, the echo chamber will threaten your status. You know, if you question climate change in the group, you will risk your status. You risk getting thrown out. You risk being your reputation damaged. So the risk is huge for you to question climate change inside your echo chamber. But the risk of being wrong about climate change, you know, it's minimal, right? If you what can you do as an individual to affect climate change? Not much. So if you're wrong about that fact, if denial is the wrong thing to be, the risk of being the impact is minimal, but the risk inside the group of questioning it is huge. So echo chambers are incredibly powerful tools to not to mean don't use facts. So that's the main lesson I'm leading up to here is don't use facts when you're trying to persuade people. You can, but if I'm talking to you, if you're a climate skeptic, a climate denier, or somebody who's cautious about smart growth and the benefits of smart growth, and I'm talking when you're giving you facts, you're not going to hear any of it. You may be looking at me and nodding, but what you're going to be instead is I've just triggered your identity protective reasoning. So you're thinking, well, okay, here's a professor, he's talking about climate change, he must be liberal, he's probably urban, maybe he's advocating communism, he's probably an atheist. You're just confirming the identity protective reasoning of your echo chamber. So all I've done by giving you facts is triggered this problem. So it's very difficult to use facts to change people's minds. But if you do want to use facts, I'm suggesting you target the elites, right? So here's the buckle up sort of time. You can change people's minds, you can change the elites, and if you can change the minds of the elites, the whole group will change, right? So don't target the group members, don't target the laity with facts, because most of them are not going to pay attention to the facts. They're just adopting the party line. They're just agreeing with climate denial, or that they don't like smart growth, or they don't like sustainability because that's what the party doesn't like. That's what the party line doesn't like. They're not going to know the facts. But if you get the elites to change, if you get the group leaders to change, then the whole group will change. And you can see examples of that with gay marriage and gay rights. Groups change, and then suddenly leaders change, and then suddenly whole groups change. And there's a little bit of evidence that's happening with climate in the evangelical community and some of the conservative community, but it hasn't happened yet. But you need to target elites if you're going to use facts. And that means buckle up, because they're really equipped, right? Really motivated to have that argument with you. What you could do instead is emphasize identity. If whatever outcome you want, whether it be smart growth or climate or whatever it is, make it cool. Make it something to be in the group. You get people to join a group because it's cool, because it reflects a positive identity. People will adopt the facts, adopt the positions, regardless of whether they believe it, right? They won't even question it. They'll just believe it because it's what it takes to be in the group. Let me give you an example. Here's one. The Changing Taste is a great group and we talk about them in the book a bit. But let's say you want to promote a plant-forward diet. That beef, we know, is deeply problematic from a sustainability perspective. It emits a lot of carbon, especially ruminant. Well, beef is ruminant, but any kind of meat-based protein. I think if cattle were a nation, they'd be the third largest emitter of greenhouse gases. Also use a lot of water. Consume a lot of habitat. So it's deeply problematic, and there's a lot of effort to try to promote a plant-forward diet, to move from a meat at the center of the plate to plant-based protein at the center of the plate. And so this group called Changing Taste has been working with celebrity chefs and trying to get them, we're targeting the leaders, getting them to promote plant-forward diets and moving plants to the center of the plate. And so they've bought into this. And then so the foodies and other chefs and household cooks, they're doing the same thing because they want to be like the celebrity chef. As a result, menus are changing and recipes are changing and cookbooks are changing. It's really quite a dramatic change in what we eat. And most people don't even know why they're doing it. Doesn't have anything to do with the facts and figures of the sustainability issues of eating too much meat. But it's a huge impact, and it's based on identity. So you can think of ways of doing this for smart growth or any other outcome. One other concept I want to talk about is yes and. If you're in an argument, if you're having a discussion with somebody and they're making their case, and your first response is yes, but they know immediately that what's coming next is a refutation, right? You've just said they're wrong. When you say yes, but, it means, okay, I'm now going to tell you the truth. you were wrong and here's the truth. So you've triggered identity protective reasoning. You said they're wrong, right? If you can instead say yes and, you've invited the conversation to continue, right? This is an old improvisation technique. It's a theater arts technique that's based on identity management. You can keep you without threatening people's identity. You can get them to continue the conversation. So you can more likely achieve collaboration if you say yes and rather than yes but. Another little trick, all these I'm sure are very familiar to you, is to affirm people's self-worth, right? I'm about ready we're about ready to have a conversation about something difficult, about smart growth or whatever. And so I pull people aside and I say, you know, I really appreciate what you've done in the past, or I really like the talk you gave, or the position you made, or you know, the way you look, the clothes you're wearing, or whatever it is. And so people's self-image feels good. So if they're feeling confident about themselves, they're more likely to absorb comments and critiques that differ from their identity, right? Because they're feeling strong, they're feeling powerful. So how do you get people to engage in conversation? One is to affirm their identity before you have that conversation. So I'm about ready to bring in David, and we're going to talk about a variety of things, any questions you have, but I just want to remind you, so affirmation, yes and, trigger identity, you know, avoid facts. These are all things we can do in the identity management suite of tools to have impact, have influence. Okay, David, any questions?
Yeah, Bruce, we've got quite a few questions. But first, before I jump into those, Island Press would like me to make a brief announcement that if anyone's interested in purchasing the book, the code, you can use a code. It's SMART, capital letters, and you'll get 30% off through the Island Press website. So with that announcement made, let me jump into a few questions. Bruce, we've gotten several questions around this concept of elites. And one of the recurring questions has been, how do you define or identify elites? You know, what people are you talking about when you're talking about elites? And then if you could elaborate a little bit more on why are you suggesting people target elites versus other portions of the population? There's some of the questions came with identifying challenges of working with elites, that they may have vested interests already, that they may be hard to approach, they may not represent the population at large, et cetera. So if you could speak to this issue a little bit more.
Yeah, I think that is a great question and a critical point. So the positions of groups tend to be defined by group leaders and elites. And so whoever is shaping that group's position, those are the ones that you need to flip, because then the whole group will follow. So by elite, it could be the talking heads, you know, that are on the screen, the people that are in the chattering class, but even more, the people that are setting the positions for a group, because the laity, the membership of the group will follow that group. Most people in the group don't care about the facts and figures. So the challenge, though, is that the elites are very good at this, and this is one of the points I want to make for all of us, is that you know, we're all reasonably educated. We're really good at finding information, really good at constructing arguments, and that makes us even more susceptible to identity protective reasoning. The research shows that the folks who are the best educated tend to be the most susceptible to using identity protective reasoning to construct false narratives. So we're all susceptible to this. And so yes, it will be difficult when we dig in and talk to these folks. It will be, got to buckle up. There's nothing easy about it. But that's why I say, you know, basically don't use facts, manage identity instead. What do you think, David? We got time for another question?
That's your call.
Yeah.
Do we? Okay, great. Identity, you know, when we were first working on the book, Bruce, this concept of identity and managing identity was a little difficult for me to get my mind around. And I'm curious if you could speak a little bit more towards this concept of managing identity and as a way of changing behavior, and if you have some specific examples that you could speak a little bit more in depth to.
So we're social creatures, right? Humans are social. We want to belong. And we want to, our status matters, our identity matters as much as anything. We're very susceptible to critiques. You know, from conflict management, if you're in a conflictual situation and you're arguing about the facts and figures of the issue, you can have a really good conversation about that. But as soon as it starts to become an identity issue, as soon as you start to critique the person, say, you're stupid, your profession is not the right profession, you're not qualified, or you come from the wrong place, or whatever it is, you're not a member of our community, you're not a member of our city, you don't belong, then suddenly you've triggered the identity, and so my identity is being threatened. And now we have all kinds of triggers, unfortunately, including climate, green infrastructure, science, all these things now are triggers of identity, and that make collaboration very difficult. So we need to sort of steer away from some of those. And I think maybe the next example, when I talk about framing, might provide an example. So I'm gonna move on to that one. Okay, David? And we can come back to this issue.
That sounds great. I'm going to go away for a few minutes until you call me back up.
Okay, I want to talk about framing. I don't want to disappear too much there. Let me move my head out of the way, though. Big head, make it smaller. So framing is something that you're very aware of. This is a tool that you've heard a lot about it, and I just want to provide a quick example of it. If the framing, like a window frame, right? You have a frame and it directs people's attention. You only see what you see through that window. So the frame triggers emotions, identity, relationships, facts and figures. So how you frame things really, really matter. In this case, how you frame arguments. So we're ostensibly talking about smart growth here. What are some of the good and bad framings? Things you want to promote are measurable outcomes. We want to promote things that promote security and community vitality and prosperity, and we want to avoid frames that trigger green infrastructure or science or density or anything that triggers reallocation of resources like poverty or inequality. So how you frame things really affects who you bring into the tent, and how much you trigger their identity protective reasoning. How do you describe the situation? What are the outcomes you're trying to achieve? Framing is incredibly important here. And so you, as people working in the smart growth community and the planning community, are very familiar with the framing challenge. So I want to maybe talk about one aspect of it that you're a little less familiar with, is the moral foundations way of framing. I'm going to talk specifically about, there's a book by Jonathan Haidt, which talks about this. We talk about it in our book too. The Righteous Mind is a great read, but it basically suggests that we're all humans sort of carry with them some basic moral foundations. And so think about this. We all have these moral foundations, and which ones we trigger in terms of a way an argument is framed or a proposal is framed affects how people are thinking about it. And there are basically 5 moral foundations, 5, 6, 7, depending on how you slice and dice it. But here I've got it divided into 2 groups. There's a couple here in the blue which promote individualization. They promote people concerned about the individual, that individuals have opportunity, that they're cared for, that they're not harmed, and that things are fair and we're not cheating. And so this individualization moral foundation is mostly associated with folks who are a little bit left on the political spectrum, more likely to be part of the Democratic Party, for example, and hence the color in blue there. The other set, the binding moral foundations, are ways that bring the group together, that support traditions, that support the group functioning in a traditional way, so that we want to be loyal to that group. We want to protect the integrity of that group. We want to defer to authority. There's some hierarchy. There's somebody that's in charge, and that's okay. That's good to have a strong father, a strong leader. And we want to protect the purity of the group. We don't want to be degraded or soiled or diluted in some way. So you can think of from a smart growth perspective that we if you want to frame your presentation, you want to frame your outreach, you want to frame whatever you're doing using all 5 of these moral authorities. that'll bring in as many people as possible. You want to say something about health and helping children's health or helping the vulnerable and making everybody pay the full price of development. That triggers the blue, right? And you want to say something about protecting our reputation. The city's got to be strong and good, and we belong here, and we want to protect our reputation or patriotism. And that triggers the loyalty. Or maybe smart growth is endorsed by a mayor, a popular mayor, or other authority, a pope, a president, or something like that. And then likewise with purity. So this is another way of thinking about framing. And I'm going to pause again, David, and see if this, is another way of thinking about identity management. It's one that's probably people are pretty familiar with, and I'll bring you in to see if you have any questions about it.
Yeah, so kind of a couple questions about this concept of avoiding facts, Bruce, and I think it relates a little bit here as well to the framing issue. I think you mentioned they're not using words or not even positioning discussions in the context of being about science or green infrastructure. Some folks are expressing a little difficulty getting their mind around that. And so if you could elaborate on that a little bit, both the avoiding facts and this, why we would want to frame things as other than a rational argument.
Okay, so avoiding facts facts are often triggers of identity protective reasoning. And so that's one reason to avoid facts. And so if you're trying to present an argument to convince somebody to change their behavior and you're using facts, likely all you're doing is triggering identity protective reasoning. You're talking with the facts and they're hearing another narrative in their head that you've triggered. The climate denial example that I gave earlier. The other thing is that people do not lack facts, right? We're because we do confirmation bias, I can throw all the facts in the world at you, my facts, and you're really good at finding other ones because of confirmation bias, because you're so gullible. So facts are very unlikely to change people's positions and behavior. So don't use them unless you want to target the elite, the group members. Now, which framing do you want to use here? Like I talked about science as a unfortunately now a trigger that it triggers identity protective reasoning, and I listed here instead of talking about science, I recommend saying it's measurable, it's accountable, it's transparent. Those are things more people agree to and will buy in and say, okay, let me go continue the conversation with you. But as soon as you say science or even green infrastructure, things which sound good to us in the professional class are now triggers for identity protective reasoning for many people who will disagree with what we want to do. What do you think about, did I get close to your question, David?
Yeah, but I think one of the things that makes me realize, and I'm curious if you'd say a few words about this, is it seems like we're going to have to change the way we think about ourselves as professionals in order to recognize the value of some of these things, because this goes against the grain of how a lot of what we've been trained to think about ourselves and how to operate. Can you speak to that a little bit? In order to work well with others, maybe we are needing to change how we think about ourselves.
Yeah, I think that's the sort of the psychology 101 intro here, was that we're talking about collaborating across huge differences and working with diverse populations, and clearly we're struggling to do that. And as the institutions of expertise start to wane and our expertise matters less and less, we need to think differently about how we work with others. And so let's just be honest that we're social creatures, we're fallible, we're full of identity protective reasoning and confirmation bias. And so how do you use that in professional work? That's the way we need to think to have impact and influence. So it's a different way of thinking, because yeah, we're taught facts. I mean, most of the university education, a lot of the university education I'm associated with, fact. Here's the way the world is. You need to know this. This is your professional duty to be competent in these facts. But we know, David, because we work with leaders all the time, that what they really need is leadership skills to have influence. And so, yes, the facts are important. It's important that you know what's going on, right? But if you want to have influence, right? If you want to have impact, both on the problem and in your career, you need to think differently. Yeah. All right, let's see, how are we doing time? Yeah, let me go on to the next one because I think you can bring in some more of these questions. We'll have time. I'll go through trust really quickly, and that we'll have some more time to talk.
I'll be back in a few minutes then.
All right. So you can keep questions coming on that particular topic. I want to talk about a related issue. All these are sort of related. Let me get my head out of the way here. Trust. Where can I position my head that's out of the way? I'll just get rid of it. Trust is another way of thinking about collaborating across differences, having influence in others. You have to have a system that people trust. And again, this is obvious, you know this. I'm just reminding you of it and trying to put it in this bigger context to help empower you to think about how to have influence. So what is trust, right? Arguably, it has 3 dimensions, has more than 3, but 3 I want to talk about here. Performance, affection, and process. And you can manage each of these quite intentionally. Performance is, before you trust somebody or you trust some institution, you need to believe that they're competent, that they can solve the problem. And that's based on history. You know, they've solved it in the past. They've delivered on promises. Think about this as either as a multi-stakeholder collaborative that you're organizing, or maybe it's a team that you're working with, or a standing team trying to solve a problem in your own organization. You need to know that people will deliver, right? And they're able to deliver. So that performance trust really matters. And sometimes that trust is broken because people don't deliver or they don't do it with respect. And so you have to repair that trust. So that means you have to hold people accountable clearly, maybe with sanctions and maybe with probation, so they can earn their trust back. They can come back into the trusted landscape. Another is affection, right? You can promote trust through liking people that were a member of the group. We've got identity that we share. That there's a way that, you know, we're all wearing the same bling. We've got the same hat, the same logo, the same T-shirt. I'm a member of the group, or I've shared drinks with you in a happy hour, or you've told stories, or maybe we've gone on a field trip together and I got to know you as a person, right? So I like you as a person. There's affection there, and that gets broken sometimes because either somebody that's in the group, a group leader, may leave and that everybody likes, and so, oh my gosh, we've got to somehow rebuild that affection. We've got to rebuild the shared identity. We've got to pat people on the back. We've got to celebrate milestones. We've got to promote the trust that comes from affection. And finally, and as importantly, we need to promote trust in process. The process itself has to be fair and transparent. You know all the best practices to make this happen. People have to have safety to express themselves. They need to know that they have a voice. So you need people, before they join a process and while they're in the process, need to believe that the process is robust, correctable, transparent. And oftentimes that gets broken, that trust gets broken. And one way to do it is to repair that trust is to give control over to others, so that they, to the group members, so that they can say, okay, you know, this is what we're going to do in these situations. This is how we're going to decide who gets to speak and how long. You know, you give control over process to the group members, and that's a standard best practice. Facilitators do that all the time. The more difficult control to give over to the group is membership, right? Who belongs? Who has a voice? Who should be in the group to have this conversation with us to make this decision? That's a more difficult thing for many professionals to give control over, is who has a seat at the table. But that also, if you want to repair trust, often has to be done. You need to bring people back to the table and give some control. So with that, David, any questions on any of the other topics we talked about or on trust?
Yeah, we've got quite a few questions, Bruce. And I'm going to put a couple of things out on the table here, and you can respond to as you see fit. But we've gotten a couple of questions about transparency and accountability, and maybe this you could link this to trust a little bit. But another question is, how do these different forms of trust relate to one another? Can one make up for another? Are they used in collaboration with one another, et cetera? So if you could speak to any of those issues.
All right, I think I'll start with the second one, because really that's the way I want you to be thinking about trust. It's really an ecosystem. Our colleague Mark Stern calls it a sort of an ecosystem of trust, and you want to manage that ecosystem. They complement each other, and really an effective group, whether it's a multi-stakeholder group, a team within your work environment, your family. You want to have all three of these kinds of trust complementing each other. And when one breaks down, maybe because somebody doesn't perform, or maybe a much liked person leaves, or the process has a hiccup, the others can compensate a little bit to keep the group going. It's certainly, the group is more likely to maintain integrity and function if you have all three strong, and maybe at least two. So they can compensate for each other some, but you really want to maintain all three. And that means you need to pay attention to it, you need to promote it, and you certainly need to repair it quickly and openly as it happens. Now, the transparency and accountability is just so important, because that is a very powerful tool to promote trust. Because if things are clear, what's expected, what's going to happen, what are the implications of not delivering, that invites trust in the process, and holding people accountable for their actions makes them responsible, because now their identity is associated with performance. Their identity is associated with delivering for the group, because I'm accountable to the group. My identity, to the extent that it's associated with the group, is now dependent upon my ability to deliver. So accountability and transparency are related to identity and trust, very much so. Yeah.
Okay. So we've got a very specific question here from Rick Brown, and it links several of these concepts together then. So let me ask this one. If facts no longer matter, how can you then hold leaders or others accountable?
Yeah, wow, that's cool. So I'm not saying that facts don't matter. I think facts are incredibly important, and that we need facts, we need science. So, but I'm talking to the choir here, right? I'm talking to other experts who have bought into rational, fact-based decision-making, expert-based decision-making. So we need facts. I'm not saying they don't matter. What I'm saying is that if we're talking about building a collaborative, multi-stakeholder effort to promote something like smart growth, or climate change, or a food system change, or whatever it is, we need to think about other tools. We need to think about identity and affinity and trust, right, and framing. These are the things that bring people to the table, that promote discussions, promote collaboration. And so we can still hold people accountable as the group decides what are the measurable outcomes. What do we want to achieve? What is the direction we want to go? We want to go this way? Okay, well, what are benchmarks that identify that? Those are the things we're going to hold ourselves accountable for. We're going to measure those things. We're going to say, are we getting there? Are we as a group getting where we want to go? So I'm not saying measurement is bad. I'm saying it's good. I'm not saying facts are bad. I'm saying they're good. I'm saying we have to use them as a way to hold ourselves accountable towards the direction that we collectively decide to go, to get direction, alignment, and commitment. But we don't use, well, rarely can we use facts effectively to change people's minds, to change their behaviors.
Do you have time for another one, Bruce?
Yeah. One more, and then we'll move on to impact.
So, all right. So this is this is sort of a compilation question. Several people have asked about the role of education here, and can more education, better education, solve some of the challenges that you're talking about?
Well, yeah. I mean, I believe in education. I'm an educator. We're here in a professional education community of practice, sharing ideas. So yeah, education certainly matters. And to the extent that people are broadened by their educational spectrum, by the education, to the extent that they're made better listeners and can hear other voices in the plurality, that can find ways to bridge the gap between those different visions that many people bring to the table. I think education is incredibly powerful. If education is just expertise and facts and dogma, saying, this is the way, this is the solution, then it's going to get in the way. So we need education that empowers us to be better listeners, to know how to bridge the differences that are out there, and to bring in people into the collective decision making to get direction, alignment, commitment, right? how do you get direct? You're not going to get that without being educated. You have to be very sophisticated in understanding what the situation is, what the diversity of opinions are out there, and how do you get directional alignment commitment. So absolutely education is important, but maybe it's not, I hate to call them soft skills, but it's understanding how to use knowledge effectively. And remember what I said earlier is we're all incredibly susceptible to identity protective reasoning. And one of the dangers of being educated is, you can just learn how to defend your own dogma really well, because you know how to use search engines and build arguments better than most people, the better educated you are. Then, that way it's going to work against things. You need to figure out how to build bridges and promote boundary spanning leadership. Let me quickly go through collective impact, then we can bring back a few more questions. How about that? All right, I want to end on collective impact. I'm going to talk about it for a few minutes and then bring David back with some questions. But this, I think you're probably all familiar with collective impact, the smart growth community, the planning community. This is basically a set of best practices for multi-stakeholder collaboration. If you go to the internet and find examples of collective impact, there's a lot written on it. There's good consultancies for it. We talk about it in our book as well. But the evidence shows that any multi-stakeholder collaborative where you're trying to do something like smart growth or climate change or whatever, or the case I'm going to be talking about is community energy planning, is if you have these 5 qualities, if you have directional, shared measurement, aligned activities, you communicate, adapt in the backbone, you're more likely to succeed. And you'll see, these practices. And what I want to do is close on this because it ties together a lot of the other topics that I talked about. But before I go through those specifics, I want to shout out to my friends in Arlington County, Virginia. I think some are on the webinar today. The energy team there really have a great community energy plan. It's an award-winning energy plan that the community itself has been a leader in smart growth for some time, and now they're sort of a leader in community energy planning as well. They've got this very ambitious effort to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to 0, right? And that's a big ask. It involves all kinds of different actors, right? You got the buildings need to be changed, private and publicly owned buildings. The transportation system needs to change. The energy supply itself needs to change. Residents need to change. And so we've got all kinds of stakeholders that need to be brought into this. Just take the building sector as an example, right? You've got the developers, you've got the financiers, you've got the owners, the renters. They all need to be a part of this discussion. So it's an incredibly difficult task. And Arlington did a great job using best practices for multi-stakeholder collaboration that basically use collective impact. Them and the consultants that were helping them. And so direction, right? I've been talking about directional alignment commitment. So if you want a multi-stakeholder collaborative to succeed, you've got to get direction, right? You've got to get people to say, okay, this is the direction we're going. But that's really hard to do because at first you don't want to determine that direction in advance. You've got to let the group decide what direction they want to go. Right? And so you need a process that's trusted and open and correctable and people believe in. Right? They have confidence that their voice will be heard. So a big part of getting direction in a multi-stakeholder collaborative is creating a process that allows the stakeholders to actually define the goals, define the outcomes that they want to achieve. And Arlington has a great sort of example of how it started a bit talking about this effort a decade or so ago, and there were terms like sustainability and climate set as preliminary goals, and those got sort of jettisoned for more inclusive framed terms like energy security, economic development, and fairness. These are more inclusive frames. They trigger different sets of identities. They bring more people into the planning process, and so they work really well getting direction. They also, another attribute of a successful collective impact, a successful multi-stakeholder collaborative, is to have shared measurement, to have good, strong measurement of, like we've been talking about, of the outcomes that you're trying to achieve. And this is no easy task, right? Because once you decide sort of generally what direction you're going, you need to then say, okay, well, how do we measure that? Because until we measure it, we can't really manage it. We certainly can't hold ourselves accountable. And Arlington's done a great job identifying dozens of outcomes, everything from the percentage of energy efficient buildings and floor space, and how the government itself, facilities are changing, and just dozens and dozens of these outcomes. And it helps because they're benchmarked to a specific time that they can hold yourself accountable. And say, are we making progress towards the goal that we want? If not, we need to change. We need to change something. And so you need shared measurement. So you need to have direction. You need to have shared measurement, which helps with direction. You need to then sort of alignment, right? Obviously, you've got all these actors that need to be involved, and this is no easy task. Arlington found that even within their own government, within their own agency, within the own government itself, there are silos. There are different departments that, in those departments, as you know, they compete with each other, right? They want budgets, they've got status, they want authority, and so if you don't want to take away a task from one agency or one department and give it to another, because that makes things contentious. So how do you align people's activities, not just within the government, then across government? There are activities that nobody was able to do in the community. So you had to create NGOs, and you had to incentivize developers. You had to find ways to promote green building incentives and other sorts of things, and help residents find how to retrofit and stuff. So you had to align activities. So direction and alignment, clearly. Constant communication is the fourth attribute of a successful collective impact, a successful multi-stakeholder collaborative. And here, this is holding people accountable. This is being transparent in the process. This is building trust, being very careful to make sure you hear what people are asking you, and specifically responding to what they've asked, so that they know they've been heard, and the process is open and transparent, and it's responded to what people said. It's also learning by doing. There's a lot of failure, not just in Arlington, but anywhere. We've got to try a lot of things and figure out what's going to work. And one way to learn by doing is to constant communication. What are lessons that we're learning? Where are the successes? What are the failures? What other people are doing stuff? And to have a very effective communication strategy, that's critical. And then finally is the backbone organization. And this is one of the things that's most overlooked. It seems to be the #1 reason why many multi-stakeholder collaboratives fail, is because there's not an organization or set of organizations that are doing the budgeting and the fundraising and writing the proposals and organizing the minutes and managing the communication system and doing the measurements and creating the dashboards and all the stuff that requires to done. That needs to be recognized, celebrated, and done, right? And Arlington stepped up here, and they budgeted and they provided staff, and they're still doing this now that the planning is done and they're in the implementation stage. And here's a shout out to funders. If you're in the funding business, you tend not to fund this, right? And that's deeply problematic, because you want to fund outcomes, you want to fund buildings, you want to fund educated people, you want to fund reductions in poverty. That's all good stuff, but you need to also fund the backbone. This is operations, this is overhead. You need to make sure it's funded, because if it's not funded, it's not going to be done well, and the whole process will suffer. So you want to have shared direction, you want to have shared measurement, you want to have aligned activities, you want to have good communication system, and you need to have a backbone. That's collective impact. And just 1 minute before I bring you back, David, I just want to sort of give my final pitch here for why I'm sort of excited about this topic, is that this type of leadership, direction, alignment, commitment, the idea that we can all lead from where we are, is incredibly empowering and optimistic. I mean, I see so many examples of people affecting change sort of one system at a time. Working through the food system, working through the smart growth, working through the energy system. And those things are happening because people are figuring out ways to get direction, alignment, commitment in the scheme of things. And that's leading to change. That's leading to system changes. Those things scale and scale up. So with that, David, let's see if we've got time for a few questions about collective impact, if you want.
Okay. Yes. A few questions. Bruce, particularly about backbones, if you can speak to that part of the collective impact model a little bit more. What do the backbones do? Why is that important? important? And does it need to be done by one organization, or can it be multiple organizations playing that role?
Yeah, well, I said there. I mean, all this is important to get direction alignment commitment. All those 5 attributes of DAC, of collective impact, and the backbone is just like it said. It is the backbone by which the busy work gets done. And can it be done by multiple organizations? Absolutely. The management is going to be a little bit heavier lift sometimes, but often that's required because it's expensive. It takes money, it takes talent, it takes time, it takes staff, and it's not always, you don't always have a government like a county government. Like Arlington stepped up in this case. They had the budget, right? They had energy fees they could use. They had staff that they could allocate to this, and they had motivated people on board that would do it. And so it made sense that it was housed in one place, but it doesn't have to be. What has to be done are these different activities, right? You have to have, somebody's got to do the budgeting and the meetings and find the experts and do all the communication stuff, right? Those activities need to be done, and you just need to recognize it, fund it, and get it done.
Okay, great. Well, sort of along those lines, Bruce, alignment is, in many respects, I mean, it's standard management process, but in this case of collective impact, it's difficult. If you could speak to that, but before you do, let me ask you a specific question from Stephen Buckley that also gets at this more general question. Stephen asked, just as a community energy plan uses LEED energy standards, for example, should a plan for community engagement also use standards for collaboration? Are there specific best practices for collaboration that a community should use?
Well, I think standards are great, right? Because it's one way to share best practices across a wide group of people. So within the smart growth community, there are all kinds of standards about what smart growth means and what it requires and how to deliver it. Like collective impact is in some ways standards. These are the standard best practices for multi-stakeholder collaboratives. So it's a way to share and spread that through the community of professionals that need to implement it. So yes, absolutely, there are standards for collaboration for best practices, just as there are standards for energy efficient buildings or sustainable soy or cotton. The standards that we set are important. The alignment question is a dicey one, because when we align our activities, we tend to create situations where organizations that used to compete for budgets to do the same thing. So we've got an activity that needs doing, and in the past there were 3 or 4 organizations, maybe within the silos of the government or NGOs outside or businesses. That's my task. I compete against other NGOs to do that, and so it becomes very contentious, very political. People don't want to share, right? That this is my turf. This is what I do. This is what my reputation is. And so I want you to fund me. I don't want you to fund my competitor. But when we're thinking about collective impact, when we're thinking about organizing people across a variety of sectors and people that aren't otherwise connected in this multi-stakeholder collaborative to solve this big problem like energy or smart growth, you need to divide and conquer, right? You need to assign tasks that need doing, and you need to pat people on the back and reward them for doing it. And if nobody's doing the mundane tasks and everybody's doing the glory tasks, you're not going to succeed. If people are competing over and whining over doing that, somebody else is doing my work, and then there are 10 other things not being done, you're not going to succeed. So alignment, there's no easy task. It's deeply political, deeply contentious, in part because it's identity related. This is my problem. This is what I solve. What are you doing in my turf, right?
All right, so
one more question? Then
yeah, another question. This isn't specifically about collective impact, but I think it does get at why collective impact and processes like it are important. So this is a question from Rob Alexander. I lost the connection of this talk to systems thinking and systems change. Can the speaker be more specific about these connections?
Well, all these are systems, right? We're talking about, in the case of community energy system or a food system in the meat example, we're talking about stepping back and thinking what the big leverage points are and how the different stakeholders are connected. Many of those stakeholders are not going to be in the same organization, so most of them no one has authority over them, right? They're coming with different agendas, different ideas, so they're very contentious, right? People have huge differences in what they want to come to the situation with, so their collaboration is not easy, and the system itself is pretty dynamic. It's changing, so we need to constantly learn by doing. We need to try out new tools. We need to test them. We need to learn by doing. We need to figure out how to fail forward. We need tools to help us fail forward and build resiliency. And so you need to think about this from a systems perspective, but that doesn't mean it doesn't also require leadership, right? Yes, you need to have a systems perspective, but how do you mobilize the stakeholders? How do you mobilize the resources? How do you connect all those different sectors and actors together in that literally it's a cross-sector space where businesses, government, and civil society intersect to solve these systems level changes, right? That by collaborating, we're collaborating across space and time and organization and power. And so it is very much a systems level challenge, but everything's a system. Energy's a system, food's a system, city's a system, smart growth is a system, and each of us are working in little pieces of that, and directional alignment commitment works in each of those pieces. Great. So I promised to give Michael the floor here. Do you have anything else you want to wrap up, or should we give it to Michael?
No, I think it's fine to bring Michael in. I mean, there's a ton of questions here, but we'll never get to all of them. And Mike, I think maybe has some as well.
Questions, okay.
I appreciate both of you talking through all of these questions. We've gotten more than 100 questions and comments. In fact, it may be as much as 150. So we've gone through a lot of the material very quickly. So I'll just ask a couple follow-ups here among the many, and we'll go to about 2:30 or so, and then we'll wrap for folks who are online. We still have more than 900 people with us today. So I guess another specific question here. Does the book provide techniques or examples of how these approaches can be applied in practice? And does it address different techniques for different forums? For example, social media versus letters versus face-to-face, et cetera.
Yeah, a great question. So yes, the book has a lot of examples, right, of specific tools and strategies, and I showed an image that lists some of them. Let me pull that screen back up. We do not focus a whole lot on communications, right? So you've talked about social media and other ways to influence public opinion or the political process. That's really not the focus of this book. This is really a systems change for folks working as a professional in some of the wicked problems like smart growth and food systems and climate change and water scarcity and poverty reduction. And so this list of tools here are some of the ones that we talk about through the book. But honestly, communications is not as important as it is. And in our graduate program, we have a lot of emphasis on communications. Even have a theater arts professor and actress come in to work on communication. So it's incredibly important. I agree. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Next question is, in the search for professional positions, regardless of level, what would you recommend to determine if an organization supports shared leadership?
Well, I guess, so organizations, change within an organization is an incredible challenge. Maybe second only to change outside of organizations. So this the type of change mostly that I've been talking about today is where organizations have to collaborate with other organizations. So at least within an organization, there tends to be some authority, right? There tends to be some some mechanism to enforce a commitment, direction alignment commitment, right? There's some structure that says, okay, this is the direction we're going. You're doing that, and I'm doing this. This is the alignment of activities, and you're committed to do it. And I'm going to pay you. You know, you're evaluated based upon your delivery of that. But even then, authority doesn't, as we know, doesn't always motivate people. They need to have buy-in. They believe it's their own idea. They need to be willing to change. And so ultimately, even within an organization, shared leadership is, I would argue, the goal, right? The biggest outcome is to empower people to make the difference, that they collectively get direction alignment commitment. So even people in the C-suite of an organization are a need ultimately to get direction, alignment, and commitment. David, you're back in. Do you have a response to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that the very particular approach to shared leadership of DAC is one that was developed in the mid-2000s and then subsequently specifically for working beyond the organizational scale and on challenges that required multiple organizations to work together. So yeah, there's various approaches to shared leadership, but this one in particular, DAC, is for the beyond the organizational scale primarily.
But it's still ultimately, if the organization changes, does something, they've got DAC, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, somehow. Michael.
Okay. Next question is, what tips do you have for wrangling a big multidisciplinary coalition? It seems like a lot of responsibility necessarily falls to facilitators and mediators who can set limits in the process and consolidate or integrate inputs from a wide-ranging interest set. Credibility and patience suffer if a messy process makes it impossible to celebrate collective accomplishments.
Yeah, I'll take a quick stab at that. Maybe David has something too. But I mean, the reason why I ended on collective impact is because it's most people in this audience are doing multi-stakeholder collaboratives, and facilitation certainly matters. That's how you get the shared direction. That's how you get the alignment of activities and resources. That's how you get the constant communication. So yeah, a lot is riding on creating that process that creates direction alignment commitment, and building the trust that's required. Facilitation skills are critical, and I guess what I would suggest is that really that's the ultimate goal of facilitation in a multi-stakeholder collaborative, is building direction alignment commitment among the stakeholders. How do you do that, right? And you're going to do it with identity management. You're going to do it with trust. You're going to do it with framing. You're definitely going to do it with collective impact. You have any thoughts, David?
No, I think you covered it well.
Okay, I guess a somewhat follow-up question that just sort of I'm looking at randomly, but I think it follows what you're saying, which is how constant is constant communication, and how do we avoid annoying, long-lasting, fruitless, recurrent meetings?
You don't like to meet? Yeah, I feel your pain. It's so easy now on Zoom, right? So of course every situation is going to be different. So I guess it depends. But yeah, I think what sorts of communication promote direction alignment commitment? I guess you need to have some criteria. Endless meetings don't necessarily do that. They don't build commitment. People don't show up, right? So you need to feel like there's some deliverable at stake, something at stake that needs merits a meeting, right? And some information needs to be shared without a meeting, right? It's just one way, right? This is what we're going to do, or these were the minutes of the meeting. You don't need to have a meeting for lots of this information. I think that related and important question is sort of figuring out who needs to be communicated with. So we talk a lot about in the book and in leadership in general is the stakeholder analysis. Who needs to be kept updated and involved with, who's the most material people that need to make decisions and be engaged in the communications on a regular basis. And then there's another tier, maybe people that need to kind of have some say occasionally on what the core group is doing. That the issues are a little less material to them. They have a little less influence, but they're still very interested in it. And then there's another tier in stakeholder analysis that really just needs to be updated periodically. They don't need to be engaged in every meeting. So when we're thinking about constant communication, you need to think about the different levels of stakeholders and who needs to be updated and engaged at what level. That's quite clear. Yeah. Any thoughts on that, David?
Well, there was a related question to that was asking about underfunded groups and communities and the resources, both of time and money, that's often required to collaborate, or just, you know, as an extension of the communication question. And so, you know, I guess I'll pose another question here to you, Bruce, about do you have thoughts about you know, the burden of collaboration that is sometimes imposed on stakeholders that might not have the time or other resources to participate as fully as others?
Yeah, I hinted at that. You know, who needs to be at the meeting, right? Or whose voice needs to be heard. Few issues resonate more clearly now in you know, the racial reckoning era here that we're in. The environmental justice issues are enormous, and so it is a challenge. I know from doing a lot of climate adaptation work, it's a huge challenge to be able to get all those voices represented, because the folks that have time and money and power and are paid to participate in these meetings, they show up, right? You can get them at the meeting. A lot of the other voices you know, are at work or in children, or just it's not a priority, or it's a priority, but it's not as high a priority. So yeah, I feel the pain. That doesn't excuse us for ignoring them or figuring out some way to get that voice into the process. Because if we want to get directional alignment commitment across the stakeholders who really matter, right, we need to engage those stakeholders and hear their voices some way.
So Bruce, can a process like collective impact or the backbone function help with that? Does it relieve some of that burden for some of the participants that would need to be involved, but otherwise it might not be?
I think that could be a good task and perhaps an essential task for the backbone to seek out and find ways to have those positions, issues, voices heard. And it will take money and time, and maybe that burden ought to fall on those with the money and the opportunity and the talent to solicit those voices and get them in. But it may not mean that you actually have to bring those voices in and have them sitting at the table. You might have to find some way to make a surrogate for that. And that does take time and money, and that could be, and should be perhaps, a charge for every backbone organization and a collective impact effort. Okay. Michael.
Great, thank you. There's a question here, if you could talk a little bit more about the backbone organization. Specifically, does it help to set the agenda or simply serve the agenda of the group? And how much does it lead versus follow? And how does the backbone organization brand itself and earn credit? Or should it be that the partners that earn the credit and seek the branding?
Yeah, there's a lot of answers to the questions in that question, I think. I mean, the collective impact, the backbone organization, as I said, is absolutely critical. But does it set the agenda? No. The agenda has to be set by the stakeholders, and that requires the process to be open and transparent, correctable, and, you know, membership is determined by the stakeholders, so they can set the agenda. That's critical. The backbone has to respond to that. But how does it get credit? How does it get paid? How does it get status? I think that's I think a challenge of our time. Many of you that do multi-stakeholder collaboratives know it's hard to get funding to do this kind of work. The funders tend to expect it to happen by overhead or by magic because it doesn't have deliverable glossy outcomes. It doesn't have the buildings or the educated people as products. So I mean that we have to insist and recognize that this task needs to be done and recognized. But they're not in the lead. They're very much a supportive role. And I think it doesn't have to be done by one organization. It can be done by many. But we just need to recognize it has to be done.
Great, thank you. Another one of our audience members asked if you had an example of a smart growth campaign that successfully used the techniques that you're advocating.
Well, I'll go even one more than that. I'll say that pretty much any multi-stakeholder collaborative that's been successful, smart growth or otherwise, food system, water, energy, education, equity issue, have used these techniques, right? Have used certainly collective impact, have used identity management. They may not have used, the fact. Don't use facts. That's too ingrained in most of us to, as professionals, not to try to win arguments with facts. And I'm just trying to help you focus your energies to where you're most likely to have influence. So I would say that pretty much anything where leadership has occurred, where changes happen, where a collective has agreed to do something and then they've done it, you will find all these practices. In the book, we talk about food systems change, and we do have examples of carbon sequestration and farming. We have issues of water and women and poverty. We have certainly the community energy plan. We have partnerships in green infrastructure. And so that's the closest that we talk about in the book to smart growth, is how to stormwater management and public-private partnerships to promote one dimension of smart growth. But I would say just about any example would of smart growth that's successful we could find good practices, good leadership practices.
Great, thanks. So we're nearing the end. We have lots of questions. I guess we can just ask another one or two and then wrap up, unless you want to go over a little bit. It's up to you guys.
A couple questions and we'll let people go, I guess.
Okay, thanks. All right, next one is, I've heard that approaching a conversation trying to convince someone of something can be problematic itself because it sets the tone that I think I know better. Would you advise avoiding trying to convince and focusing instead on finding common ground within already existing mindsets and identities? Or is spending time on convincing actually constructive and worthwhile?
Well, let me go back to identity management and facts and active listening and some of the things we talked about. So if you're trying to convince somebody based upon facts, I think you need to evaluate whether it's worth your time. If it's a group member that doesn't have much influence over the group, you may have impact, but the impact's going to be minimal. So target the elites, because that's where the change is going to occur. But that's a hard slog, and you may not have the energy and time or stomach for it. And so I understand that you choose not to. So the question sort of implies that changing minds is difficult. And that's the point that I'm making. Because of confirmation bias and identity protective reasoning, changing minds is very difficult. So you need to be very strategic about how you think about changing those minds. And I think hinted in the question was the idea that we need to understand our own positions, our own biases and perspectives and agendas in order to hear other people, hear where they're coming from, and figure out what actually we're arguing about. Is it a fact? Is it ideology? Is it a disagreement about interpretation? Use a ladder of inference or however you want to use it to figure out what's being argued about. And because you're attuned to identity conflict and the challenges of facts, you can then use boundary spanning. You can then use your active listening. You can then use your communication skills to talk about the things that really matter. Whether it's interest-based negotiation, focus on the interest, not the positions. Whether it's boundary spanning, there are all kinds of tools you can use. But that is the challenge, right? And we tried to mention a few of the tricks of the trade today. Do you have a way of thinking about that, David?
Yeah, well, it made me think about a larger concept of situational leadership. And, not to seem Pollyannish or anything, but, leadership and influence is highly situational. It's, know your audience, I think, is underlying message here, whether it's communication or otherwise. And you have to, pick and choose your strategies strategically in order to be able to work effectively with others who typically are not like yourself. And that's, I think, the underlying message of the book as well.
Excellent, thank you. Well, now that we're reaching 2:30, I think we'll just wrap. And thanks to everybody who submitted all the questions. We'll share them with the panelists today and give you all a chance to review and figure out if there's a way for us to have a next steps with you, because I think there's a lot of interest in this topic. But just before we do end, I just wanted to give each of you a chance to give us some closing thoughts and takeaways that we can begin to apply after we leave today. If we should maybe start with David, and then Bruce can conclude us that way.
Well, that sounds good. I'd just like to say thank you. You know, as Bruce mentioned, we teach a professional graduate education program together, have for years. And typically, you know, our classes are about 30 people. Today we've had the opportunity to interact with, I guess, a little over 2,000. So this has been a delightful treat and opportunity for us, and hopefully been able to have a little influence ourselves. So thank you very much.
Yeah, likewise, thank you. It's great to reach out. I mean, the reason we do this work is to increase the impact and influence of professionals, of working professionals, right? That's why we put this stuff in the leadership book. It's why we teach. Yeah, we're not getting royalties from the book. Island is a nonprofit. This is all about having impact. And so I just want to end on 2 quick points. One, directional alignment commitment, right? Think about it. You can have influence, dramatic influence, if you start thinking about how to have influence using directional alignment commitment. Secondly, is that there are so much reason to be optimistic about systems level change, of figuring out how to get these smaller systems to start to change and scaling them up. And that will change the behavior of so many people. There's just great examples after example after example of where successful applications of these tools can be found. And they're inspiring. And so there's reason to be hopeful. It's hard work, but it's good work. And I'm just so happy to have an opportunity to talk to folks that are doing the good work. So thank you for all the good work you do.
Great, thank you, Bruce. And I'll just note that the discount code was on the back of his screen. So hopefully those of you who are visiting Island Press interested in can use that code. So with that, we will go ahead and close our webinar today, which was Leadership for Sustainability, Strategies for Tackling Wicked Problems. I'd like to offer a great big thank you to Bruce Hull and to David Robertson for a great presentation, to everyone who attended, and to John Coleman, our communications and technology guru, who continues to help make this all happen in 2021 and beyond. The complete recording of today's webinar will be posted on smartgrowth.org. Also, for those of you who have requested one, all attendees will receive an email that will contain a link to a personalized certificate of participation. Please look for this follow-up email. When you exit from today's webinar, you'll be asked to participate in a short evaluation. Please take a few moments to provide feedback so that we can continue to improve the webinar experience for you. And finally, keep an eye on smartgrowth.org and your email inbox for details on other future webinars. We have several in the works for you. So please have a great day. Thank you.